2017, a year of multiple missile launches, provocative statements, mocking tweets, and fiery rhetoric.
We will have no choice but to totally destroy North Korea.
A standoff between two leaders, arguably both as unpredictable as the other. A war of words that many fear could bring the world to the brink of nuclear conflict.
It's against this backdrop the Norwegian Nobel Committee awarded this year's Prize for Peace to the international campaign to abolish nuclear weapons, honored for its successful push for a UN treaty banning them.
It's been more than 70 years since the world witnessed the catastrophic power of nuclear weapons. Despite the horror caused by their use, today thousands of warheads remain stockpiled across the world, many of them ready to be launched with just minutes' warning.
No nation has laid out plans to eliminate their arsenal. Instead, momentum is growing to modify, modernize, and build more.
Hello and welcome to the Nobel interview, an Al Jazeera special live from Oslo. I'm James Bays.
And I'm Folly Thibault. The Nobel Peace Prize has a long history dating back to 1901. Fast forward 115 years, and right here, just a few hours ago, the 2017 award was accepted by ICAN's executive director, Beatrice Fihn.
With her was Setsuko Thurlow, who experienced firsthand the atomic bombing of Hiroshima. In the next hour, we'll hear from other survivors of that attack in 1945. We'll also delve deeper into ICAN's work.
Now, some of our audience members here in Oslo will also have the opportunity to ask questions, and you can also be part of the conversation. We're streaming live on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. Connect with us using the hashtag AJNobel.
Beatrice Fihn, congratulations to you and ICAN.
Thank you so much for talking to Al Jazeera. Thank you.
It was in this very hall, just a matter of hours ago, that you, on behalf of ICAN, were awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. What does that mean for your campaign?
It means everything to us. This campaign is full of people from all over the world who've worked tirelessly on these issues for decades, for 7 decades. And it means a lot because it's a tough issue. It's under-resourced, it's you're being mocked for being naive or idealistic. So to get this kind of recognition means so much to our campaigners and partner organizations all over the world.
Beatrice Fihn, the ambassadors of the US, UK, and France did not attend the award ceremony earlier today. These countries reject the UN nuclear weapons ban treaty that your organization has been recognized and celebrated for. How do you view this snub, and how do you, as a grassroots movement, push back against these powerful countries that sit on the UN Security Council, permanent members with veto power? How do you push back against them?
We go ahead and ban their weapons, even without them. We have mobilized the whole rest of the world against nuclear weapons, and that is having an impact on them, whether or not they want to join this. They have boycotted all these meetings, and so it's not surprising that they are not here. They weren't here today. But at the same time, we are focused on the majority, on the states that also can set norms that will impact these states in the end. We're not going to wait for the last one to disarm before we prohibit nuclear weapons. We're going to go ahead and do it now, and then drag them with us.
Beatrice, I'm now going to play devil's advocate, and some in the room might say that's an appropriate phrase as I put to you some of the arguments in favour of nuclear weapons. And I think it was the British wartime leader Winston Churchill who was one of the first to pursue this argument. He said it was the sublime irony. And the argument's this, that nuclear stalemate, the risk of mass annihilation, is actually what's kept the world more secure in the last 70 years. What do you say to that?
I don't agree with that. First, we've seen huge consequences throughout the nuclear testing. We have survivors here from nuclear test areas who can tell you what they have suffered because of these weapons tests. But also, we've been so close to catastrophe throughout the Cold War. And now, decades after, when documents are being declassified, we're finding out more and more about accidents, near misses, and irrational precedents. And just look at today. I mean, we also had a war in Iraq that was fueled by threats of weapons of mass destruction. We have conflict with Iran. We've had Kashmir, North Korea right now. Look at the situation between North Korea and the United States. This does not feel safe. This does not feel like peace or stability. Rather, nuclear weapons are fueling these conflicts and making the threat of war much more likely.
But let's use the case of North Korea, because we know some of these states got their nuclear weapons through secret means. What happens if everyone gives up their nuclear weapons and yet someone doesn't, and they retain this capability? Who then is there to take them on? How do you police your new nuclear-free world?
Well, there's a huge amount of verification programs. We see right now with the Iran deal, for example, a very strict verification programs that we'll be able to control. I don't think that is going to be the problem. The problem is going to get countries to want to disarm. When we can get countries to want to disarm, we are going to fix the technical side of this. But right now we have a situation where a country like the United States or UK or France or China and Russia have spent the last 70 years arguing that nuclear weapons equal security. And of course, a vulnerable, weak state like North Korea is going to listen to that and want the same. We have given these weapons power. We see them as powerful. But when we stop doing that, we can also get disarmament.
All right, Beatrice, a question here from one of our audience members, Kari Surumaki, who's a university student at UWC Nordic. Your question. Stand up, please.
Thank you. My question is, what do you think about the criticism that nuclear ban treaty is too idealistic?
Well, I think that the treaty is, first of all, it is realistic because it exists. It is here. But also, it actually takes reality into consideration. It doesn't focus on abstract theories and our perception of what we hope nuclear weapons will achieve. But it looks at facts. What happens when nuclear weapons are used? And many of you heard Setsuko Thurlov talk about today. What happens when nuclear weapons are used? That is the reality. There is no preparedness to deal with the consequences. There are no national or international relief agencies that will be able to provide adequate help to survivors. The only solution is to prevent this from happening. And as long as they exist, it will happen one day.
Well, we put out a call out on Twitter earlier asking people what they thought of this treaty, Beatrice, asking them if they thought the international campaign to abolish nuclear weapons project treaty is realistic. And I want to give you just the results of that poll. Now, 37% of the people who responded say, yes, it is possible. 58% say no, it is too idealistic, and 5% think otherwise. And an interesting question here from one of the people on social media, on Twitter, the user @AnotherMind, who says they can't be abolished. Who do you expect to be the enforcer? Well, that's a legitimate question and an important one. Through what mechanism is a treaty enforced? What organization steps in to enforce it?
Well, first of all, it is realistic because we have prohibited other weapons and gotten rid of other weapons, chemical weapons, biological weapons, landmines and cluster munitions. We are moving to a world where indiscriminate weapons that violates the laws of war are no longer acceptable military policies. And of course, it's going to require a lot of inspection. We have the IAEA, for example, who has detected problems in the past. And all of these details are going to be solved when the nuclear armed states are joining this treaty.
Perhaps your treaty brings a little optimism, but let's look at what's going on in the world. And you have North Korea, which is firing missiles, testing its nuclear capabilities. You have a war of words between North Korea and the US. And then you have Iran and President Trump threatening to torpedo the Iran nuclear deal. Look at this moment in history. How dangerous is it right now?
Very dangerous. I think we're, just as the Cuban Missile Crisis, really close to a nuclear disaster. And of course, as these threats are increasing, their militaries are also getting prepared, being responsive to these kind of threats, which also increases the risk of an accident. The risk is always above zero, which means that if we keep nuclear weapons forever, they will be used.
Beatrice Fihn, When you gave your acceptance speech at the podium behind me, I was listening very carefully. You talked about leaders with a bruised ego. You talked about one impulsive tantrum away. You were referring to President Trump, weren't you? Tell us what you think about the current President of the United States, the man in charge of the nuclear football, the man with the launch codes and his temperament.
I think it's a very dangerous situation. I think the more world leaders actively threat with nuclear weapons, the more you also undermine this kind of norm that we had so far that, oh, you're not supposed to go there. And it just really increases the risk of them being used. And you also see that coupled with huge investments in modernization programs, a new nuclear posture review that is rolling back on other steps and going in the wrong direction, developing new types of nuclear weapons, small, usable nuclear weapons. In addition, of course, also openly mocking diplomacy as an alternative. And that is one of the most dangerous things, I think, to see negotiated agreements, solutions to problems, peaceful solutions as something negative, and that bombing, killing civilians would be better, stronger. It's absurd.
You would have been critical, I think, of any US president and their nuclear strategy. But Donald Trump is different. And just days before you got the news that ICAN was going to get the Nobel Peace Prize, you were on Twitter referring, I think, to comments attributed to the US Secretary of State. You tweeted, "Donald Trump is a moron." Can he be trusted?
To think that you can use nuclear weapons is moronic. To rely on nuclear weapons and think that that provides you security is moronic. These weapons are threats. They are not keeping us safe. They are keeping us unsafe.
Okay. Beatrice, another question from our audience here in Oslo. And this is Lena Keller, who's a master's student at the University of Oslo. Please stand up and ask your question to Beatrice.
Thank you. The Nobel Foundation has recently admitted that in the past it made investments in companies that produce nuclear weapons. What was your first reaction when you learned about this? And did you ever consider not accepting the award?
A very good question.
Divestment of nuclear weapons production is a really big campaign issue for us. And I think that that's also one of the things we're hoping that this treaty will achieve. By prohibiting assistance to production of nuclear weapons, we can tell banks and pension funds and other financial institutions to stop investing in the production of nuclear weapons. We have had great conversations with the Nobel Foundations. I'm going to meet them in Stockholm soon.
Right.
And they have assured us that they have a policy, and they have said that there are apparently some gaps in their policy, but they have assured us that they will work together with us and our colleagues in PAX that do the joint bank on the bomb report on making sure that that is tight, that it's watertight investments, that there will be no money from the Nobel Foundation invested in nuclear weapons production.
Beatrice, but doesn't it all come down to the fact that war is lucrative? The weapons industry is lucrative. Banks invested some $500 billion in nuclear weapons between 2013 and 2016. Alfred Nobel, who created this Peace Prize, made his fortune from weapons and explosives. How pragmatic are you about this? And how do you make nuclear disarmament bankable?
Through the treaty, because we have seen from other treaties that when a weapon is prohibited, it becomes bad business. Investors stop putting money into cluster munitions production, for example, because the majority of the states in the world has prohibited it. It's no longer sound investment strategy to invest all this money in building a weapon that is going out of fashion, that is being prohibited.
Now let's talk about the human side, the human aspect. And with me now is Abaka Anjane Madison, who's a former senator from the Marshall Islands, which were the site, as you know, of multiple nuclear tests by the US in the late 40s and 50s, the most devastating one on Bikini Atoll in 1954. Please stand up. I'd like to ask you a question, and I think our audience here want to know your experience, your story, and the impacts nuclear tests have had on your livelihoods. Because very often when we talk about the impact of nuclear weapons, we think of the victims of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But you and your community has also been affected by the nuclear tests conducted by the US. Tell us how affected you've been and the impact it's had on your livelihoods.
The people of Rongelap were directly affected by the hydrogen bomb that exploded in 1954, 1,000 times greater than Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombings. The bomb has poisoned our land and forced our people to live in exile. And it also caused so many lives of our loved ones and many families to suffer even today.
But you have received reparations from the U.S.
It was inadequate, very inadequate. No one can expect and put a number, amount of money on a life. And so, and the damage that is, been lingering, it's far greater than what was estimated.
Okay, so what are you expecting out of this treaty then?
First of all, is justice, and that, human life is more important. And everyone deserves to live in peace and, with their human rights.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Abaka and Jane Madison, a former senator from the Marshall Islands, here with us in Oslo today. Thanks. I would now like to introduce to our viewers around the world two survivors of the atomic bombings, two hibakushas as they're known, from Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Teruni Tanaka and Toshiki Fujimori. Thank you so much for being with us here today. They will be speaking to us through their translator. Thank you so much, Tanaka-san. You are the last generation of survivors. Do you worry that in a few years, we will forget about Hiroshima and Nagasaki? How do you ensure that the legacy lives on?
今の核兵器は広島長崎型の核兵器と規模が全然違います。で、そういうものは絶対使っていけないということをきちんと伝えていかなくちゃいけないと思っています。
First of all, the nuclear weapons which exist today are of a completely different scale, a completely different size and level to those that were used in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. We must never allow us to forget what happened and never allow them to be used again.
What do you remember of that fateful day of August 9th, 1945, when the bomb hit your city, Nagasaki? You were just, 12 years old. I know it's very painful to relive that day, that moment, but if you could share with us your experience, what do you remember about that day?
原爆投下は予告なしに起こりました。爆撃一機で突然爆発させたので、瞬間的に身の回りが真っ白になりました。それが爆発の瞬間です。
The nuclear bomb was dropped on Nagasaki with absolutely no warning. We had no idea that it was coming, and all of a sudden this one bomb was dropped from one plane, and it just turned into a huge bright light which just immensely covered everything.
Fujimori-san, you were in Hiroshima. Tell us about your experience, and also why was it important for you to be here today? What is your message to the world?
私が被爆したのは1歳4ヶ月の時ですので、私自身には記憶はないんですが、毎年8月6日になると母親が子供を集めて自分の体験を話し聞かせてくれました。そのことが私の頭にはたくさん残っています。
I myself was only 1 year and 4 months old at the time that the bomb was dropped in Hiroshima. So my own direct memory of what happened then is not strong. However, every year on the anniversary on August 6th, my mother would gather me and all of the children together and tell us of what happened, the story of that day.
Fujimori-san, Tanaka-san, thank you so much for sharing your experience with us. Thank you. A round of applause for our two survivors of the atomic bombings who are here with us in Oslo today. Thank you so very much. Thank you.
Beatrice Fihn, really humbling listening to that. Do you worry as these events, as they inevitably will do, pass beyond living memory, that the world will not be able to connect with this horror in the same way?
Yeah, I think it is a real concern, and I think that we owe it to the survivors to heed to their call right now. Many people have ignored their stories for a very long time. We have one final chance to prohibit and eliminate nuclear weapons before they are gone, in a way. And I think that we really need to make sure that they get to watch that. And I know that many survivors were extremely happy to see the treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons. But we can do more, and we must do more.
I have a question for you about, the different countries that we've mentioned. We've talked about North Korea, but we've talked about the US and all these other countries that have nuclear weapons. What do you do with a country like Israel that is not officially a nuclear power?
Well, I think it's not a very well-kept secret. But we have campaigners also in Israel, and they're doing a great job in trying to also increase transparency. This is a democratic issue, and the people of the country need to know what the state is doing on their behalf.
But on that particular issue, you mentioned democratic states and so on. The argument can be made that the treaty would only work in a country where there's a vibrant civil society, where there are solid democratic institutions, where the governments are held accountable. What do you respond to that? I mean, would such a treaty and this movement that you're trying to garner from the civil society work in a country like Russia or North Korea?
Absolutely. I think that no state is isolated from international law and international norms. I mean, some of them might be quicker to pick it up, of course, but I think that each state still has to relate to it. And I think we see that with information warfare. The reason why they're trying to distort reality is because even the worst human rights violators know that it's not really acceptable to do that in public. So I think that these norms and pressure on state works, even in non-democratic countries.
I'm going to come back to President Trump again. He's pulled out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership trade deal. He's signalled that he's coming out of the Paris climate deal. He's questioning the Iran nuclear deal. And you're starting a new international treaty. It seems that he, at least, and maybe some of the rest of the world, is going against the grain of multilateral diplomacy.
Well, this is the moment where we have to strengthen multilateral diplomacy. I think we're seeing a coordinated attack, but from many on international institutions, on law, on humanitarian values, and we can't just give up. Those that still are committed to international law, to human rights, to humanitarian law, and to international multilateral institutions have to fight harder. This is where we strengthen it. This is where we buckle down and say, no, we have to resist.
So your campaign, as we know, is about the people, not necessarily the political class. But in the political class, in the key states, the nuclear states, you do have one interesting thing, which is that in one of those states, one of the permanent members of the Security Council, for the first time you have a politician waiting in the wings who's an anti-nuclear campaigner. Do you have high hopes for the leader of the opposition in the UK, Jeremy Corbyn?
I don't think it is an accident that there's a UK politician that is supportive of this kind of work, because the UK people, the British people, have a very long tradition of being anti-nuclear weapons. And you have a huge support for this in parts of the UK, like Scotland, for example. So I think that is just a reflection of the UK society. And it's a great encouragement. And I think that everyone who wants their country to support this kind of work, to support nuclear disarmament, to join this treaty, need to elect politicians that support that.
Beatrice, you and the members of your campaign, you're campaigners, you've been working very, very hard, but you're normal human beings too. Fathers and mothers, I know you're the mother of young children. I want you to be honest and realistic with me. Do you think there will be a world free of nuclear weapons in their lifetime?
Yes, absolutely. I think change can happen really fast once it starts. And we have seen the world take huge steps forwards before. We have made so much progress on big social issues, justice issues, women's right to vote, civil rights, end of apartheid, gay marriage, things that people said it's impossible, it's never going to happen, and oh, you're being naive. And then it happens, and it just opens the gates, and it changes very, very quickly.
Surely you have some doubts, though. You're being very optimistic.
That's what we are. You have to be.
Beatrice Fihn, thank you so much, the Executive Director of ICAN, for talking to us. Folly.
Thank you so much, Beatrice. And thank you to the survivors who shared their experience with us, to our audience here in Oslo City Hall, and to all of you who connected with us on social media. Thank you so much. This has been an Al Jazeera special live from Oslo. Thank you for watching. Bye for now.